Okay, well, welcome. We're here for our We Can Do Better conversations with Nancy John, Daniel Stephen, and Olga Piehler. I'm Brian Kelly, your co-host along with Nancy. And today's topic is about the energy in leadership. What does that mean in terms of importance to being a leader and the impact on those that you lead and then the environment and then the organization? And so to get started with the topic, I'm just going to ask Daniel to kind of share his thoughts on what about energy and leadership is important to him, and what does he feel we should know about energy and leadership and its importance and impact in the workplace.
Okay, well, hi Brian, thanks for dropping the ball on me there on the first one to go. For me personally, working with executives, working with leaders, I find that a lot of people can suffer with energy levels from a varying number of reasons. It can purely stem from one or multiple of them, but often the leaders I work with are time poor. So when time is your most limited resource, it becomes really important that we manage our time effectively to allow us to make time and prioritize time for our health, coming from my perspective of health and well-being, so that we prioritize our health so that we don't suffer from a lack of energy, both physically or mentally. And then we suffer with what Olga mentioned prior to the call of, absenteeism and health problems, etc. So nutrition, hugely important for energy, both physically and mental. Exercise doesn't have to be anything crazy, but we do have to be mobile. Getting enough sleep, something that a lot of executives I work with think is tradable. They often think that I'm busy, sleep is one of the easiest things I can trade in for more time to get more work done. When conversely, if we got more sleep, we'd be more productive with the time we did have, we'd be more effective. And then on top of that, stress is a huge one. It's a succubus for energy. It just drains even the most strong-willed person. And then lastly, it's our mindset. The way we view the world, the way we view events that happen to us and around us. Events that happen tend to be neutral, but it's our perspective, it's the way we create our reality that taints it with either a positive or a negative viewpoint. So all those 5 things are kind of like the 5 pillars that I look at with my executives, my leaders that I work with. So for me, that's kind of how I view energy, is from both a physical and a mental place.
Love that, Daniel. There's so many different dimensions to it, right?
Yeah.
And so you talk about creating your conditions a little bit, and self-care, which are topics I think we'll explore a little bit more as we talk about this topic. So Olga, what are your thoughts on energy and leadership, and what has your experience been with that in terms of the workplace and your energy?
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. And Daniel, that was spot on. I can identify with so many of the aspects as a leader myself that you mentioned regarding time being tradable, and the negotiations that we make with ourselves sometimes in order to keep going and to keep pushing. So I'm coming to the call maybe from the perspective of that leader, having been in the corporate world for 18 years, having direct reports for 16 of those 18 years, and the responsibility that comes with that, and evolving as a person during that time, having life events that change and affect the energy that you can bring to work, from having all the time in the world, young, to children coming, loss of parents. So a lot of ups and downs that can affect that energy. And very young in my career, I was always told that a good leader knows how to compartmentalize. And to me, what that said was, when you walk through these doors in the morning, everything that happens in your life outside of those doors does not come into place. And there is an expectation of how you are going to behave once you are in here. And as I've thought back, I thought that was a very damaging advice for me. Because then what I couldn't do is understand what kind of energy and what's happening to me that, and how is that going to affect how I'm able to behave or come up and support my team members. So I wasn't able to look at it from a perspective of balancing what was happening outside of work from what was happening inside of work, and how was I doing in order to show up as a full person.
Love that, Olga, in terms of the whole person. And we'll get more into that, I'm sure, as well as we go further in the conversation. So Nancy, what is your experience and energy around this topic of energy and leadership?
Yeah, I can really relate to what everybody has shared so far, because it really is, it's a human thing, right? Like to what Olga said. And I guess right now we're putting energy with leadership, but if you think about energy with parenting, energy with how you show up as a business partner, energy with how you show up as a friend, a spouse, like it really does affect everything that we do. And I loved when Daniel and I had talked about this earlier, we talked about time being tradable and this idea of sleeping. And for me, when I think about sleep, and I mean, he knows this about me, I'm not even the best at my sleep patterns and habits. And he's very good about, Nancy, why don't you start now? So I even say this as somebody who's experienced it, one, in a position of leadership, to your point, Olga, but also as someone just, I don't know if, I think it's just been something that feels like, well, that's time that can be given up for something else, for more productive things. And more I realize that the more I skip on the things that are of value to me, that create a better condition for me as an individual, as a human being, that has a great impact actually on how I show up with other people. If I have time for them, if I have perceived time for them, right? Like if I have a sense that I can give something. Whenever we assume that we don't have something, then we don't have it to give, right? So I think about it that way. So the idea of energy for me really does show up in that place of, I can trade in this thing if I can get more time for this. And that for me has been more of an aha this year, maybe because I've had an opportunity to since I'm not like stepping out of corporate after over 15 years, you have this moment to kind of just take a step back. Not that I'm saying you need to take a step out of it to think about that, but there's an awareness for me around what's important and the fact that we all make choices around it. And we choose to do things that actually don't feed us in the long run to get better at other things, when depleting ourselves actually makes us less effective. And even when we think about ourselves being able to serve others, we don't have anything to give, like we can't serve. And then when we do it with a lot of like really begrudgingly about it, because we're like, well, I'm depleted, and I'm like, now I'm coming at you with like this depleted energy, but I feel that I should help you. You know, like it's not like, that's not something anybody wants. And we certainly don't want to show up that way either. So it's been definitely a really big thing for me to figure out, what do I need to take care of myself, not from not so much from like a selfishness, but like the way I do that will then help me to have more to give to others. So that's been a really good journey for me, especially this year.
Awesome. Thanks, Nancy. You guys have given me a lot in terms of where to take the conversation next, but I'm going to go back to where we started in terms of self-care, like what Daniel was talking about, and you kind of alluded to it with mindset and choice and, leaders being human, as Olga was talking about, right? Nothing happens effective in the workplace or otherwise, parenting, wherever you want to talk about in our life, if we don't take care of ourselves first. Yet, as mothers, or parents, we are always thinking about other people first, right? And so leaders, sometimes that can happen as well. And so this notion of self-care is really important. And I've heard you kind of get into the topic of energy depletion, or I'll call it energy consumption. And I talk about what is energy generating, right? So energy generating in terms of what kind of roles you choose to take on, in terms of aligning to your strengths. And so that gets me curious about awareness, self-awareness, your self-care, and then your self-awareness about your choices in terms of, hey, what kind of roles do I choose? What kind of managers do I want to work for? What kind of environments do I want to put myself in? Or is it, I just need a job, I'm going to go get a job, right? And so what kind of decision-making process do you have? And how does your energy affect that? And so I get curious about that. And so how about that in terms of how you show up at work and what I call the work mask, right? So the work mask meaning we want to survive in the workplace. So before we actually step through the doors to go to our workplace, we put that last piece of maybe invisible clothing on that we call the work mask so that we can navigate through the day, which sort of brings in a less than version of ourselves and doesn't bring that kind of amplified contribution in terms of innovation, creativity, ideas that would otherwise show up. And so I'd like to maybe expand on that more in terms of Daniel, in terms of the energy piece and the depletion, generation, and the choice mechanism around how we lead, how we kind of even lead our lives. What comes up for you when we talk about energy generating and being aware of your energy in terms of leadership in your life?
Of course. I mean, that I think is a good segue from the last thing that Nancy mentioned about it being selfish. You can't give if there's nothing left of yourself. So you can't give to others, you can't give to yourself, you can't be the best version of yourself if you're completely depleted. So I don't think it is selfish. Self-care is not selfish. Self-care is actually the first step in being selfless, because for you to be there for other people, you've got to be in a good place yourself. So all the leaders I've worked with who have gotten to a point where they've greatly improved their health and their both physical and mental, they've all reported massive improvements either in the companies they work at and for, or the companies that they own and run. You know, whether it be their staff, their employees have noticed that the environment that they're in is healthier, less stressed. It's because they've taken the time to self-care. So I think I'd love it if we could get rid of this concept that it's selfish to put yourself first once in a while. But as a boss, as a parent, I'm not a parent, but as a parent, or even just as a spouse and a partner, you do have to put yourself first. So making your health a priority is the first thing. If you don't prioritize things, then they just don't get done. So for a lot of people want to improve their energy. They want to feel better, but they aren't willing to make it a priority. So the first thing for me is always, is it a priority? If not, figure out why and then try and make it one. So if we can assume that our energy and our health is a priority, then ensuring that we make the time to do all the things that we need to do. And it's not being excessive, but ensuring that we leave time to eat a meal. So many leaders I talk to have back-to-back meetings, 6-hour-long meetings in the board, and no one's eating anything, no one's hydrating, because if you drink, you're going to have to go to the washroom. So, you're not drinking enough water, you're not eating anything. And it's just all very, very counterproductive. And without getting into a whole debate about cultural shifts that are needed in terms of society and shifting away from this idea of being busy and working really hard is the best thing to be. If we all understood that we need to drink water regularly throughout the day to keep our minds functioning optimally, we need to eat, so you need to leave time for that. You're going to feel better if you exercise. When we exercise, we release a whole load of wonderful hormones into the body, endorphins, that make us feel better and de-stress us. So when we do that, we're going to come to work as a more whole individual. If we don't make time for exercise and movement, we come to work tired, we come to work stressed, we come to work with less energy. But so many of the execs I work with are like, but I don't have the time to exercise. I don't have the time to eat. But they lose more time when they don't do it than when they do. It's like that long-term viewpoint compared to short-term view, or long-term goals, short-term goals.
Love that, Daniel. And so that whole point, right, in terms of, how many people sit at their desk during lunch and either don't eat lunch or work through lunch or don't leave the office. In terms of, and so there's this human conditioning that, we don't want to we'll have another topic on busy and all that, the notion of the workplace, but there's a habit that's been created about, I've got to constantly be moving and getting stuff done. And then I lose sight of what my self-care needs are, and I prioritize other. And so, Nancy, maybe kind of take a little, take that forward in terms of what that means to you.
So like what really is resonating for me is a conversation I've been having with a few people in the last several days, is this idea of I don't have time. And we've actually, and this is when I say we, I'm not even looking like I'm even myself, like just convinced ourselves that I don't have time. And it's funny because I was having a conversation with a friend recently and I just said, you do have time. And she was like, no, I don't have time. I'm like, no, you do have time. And it was just like a bit of a back and forth of just like that, that break, like how you interrupt a pattern of thinking. Like that's what it was, to say, we all actually do have time. It's just, we've made a choice. Like it's none of us wants to say, I don't care about it. Cause I think that's maybe more true to it, is that it's not a priority. It's actually a little bit less of a responsibility to say I don't have time, because then it kind of has put it out into, I'm busy and like all these projects and all that kind of, but the reality is, I know for me, if I take a step back and go in those moments of why am I not doing this, is because it's not a priority for me. But to say that takes on a lot of kind of responsibility and ownership of something. And that's not to say that's a bad thing. Maybe that's in this moment, you have to just be okay with like, this is not a priority, but that you can own it and not say that I don't have the time for it. So that's been like a really, like for me, that's been coming up quite a bit, to say, what don't I have time for? Because it's true, we don't have time for everything. Like that's the reality. But you make like the things that are really important, you somehow get the time for it. Like right. Somehow we create time for those things, when there's something last minute coming up, you're like, oh man, but it gets done because we created the time. Something got put aside. So it is this idea of prioritizing. And I'm a big fan of even taking it in smaller chunks so that you don't get super overwhelmed by, now I have to do this and this and this and this. Well, where can you start? That might help you just to feel like you're winning, and then you can just add to it along the way. For me, from a health and wellness perspective, I've done a lot of those things in smaller bite sizes, because then all of a sudden I'm just like, oh, look at all the things I've actually, and now this is just habit for me. Like I just do it now. Right. And I think then all of a sudden you realize, oh, I actually kind of, and I didn't really skip a beat. Like I miss a lot along the way. So I think it's a mind, it's something we tell ourselves that I don't have time. And the idea of being busy is really cool, right? Like, it's really like, yeah, I got a lot going on. I got a lot going on. Right. And so if you ever talk, can you imagine if you talk to somebody, they're like, yeah, I'm not that busy. Life's good. I'm just not busy. You'd be like, what? Like, this person's not doing anything with their life.
Right.
But, just we've become okay with not having time, and everybody would say that. So it makes me wonder, none of us have any time. Like I don't think that's the reality of it.
And it's so interesting as you're talking about the last minute request and you're scurrying and you always end up getting it done. And you said, you made a thing about there wasn't any time, and then you found the time. We didn't find the time, I would offer. You found the priority. The priority shifted in some form or fashion. Again, I think we confuse time and prioritization.
Yes.
Right? We all have 24 hours in a day, yet how many of us exercise like Daniel's talking about, or eat healthy, or work through lunch, and make those choices every day? And what if we shifted that? What if we reframed I don't have time to how do I want to best use my time? And what's the most important use of my time? What prioritization should I honor for self, to the notion of if we can't take care of ourselves, there's nothing in the tank to give anybody else. And so even if people are kind of tugging at us in terms of, Nancy, I need you to do this. Olga, I need you to do this. Daniel, I need, and whether it's work or otherwise, it's like, first, I need to take care of me before I can take care of you and everybody else. And so that notion of reframing, I don't have time, to what is the prioritization, I think is something maybe that can help people make that change. Olga,
yes.
In terms of, Daniel, and this is quotable for you, Daniel, we may use this. Self-care is the first step in becoming selfless, right? it's a selfless act to kind of put yourself first, where the notion in most of our minds is, no, it's selfish. I can't do that. I've got to care for kids, husband, wife, work. So Olga, talk about that a little bit in terms of the choice and the prioritization of self first, and the struggle maybe that has been in your experience.
Yeah, so for me, as you guys are talking, and this might be interesting for another conversation another time, but it's the awareness of choice. Because yes, we all agree, yes, we have a choice, but we only have choices that come into our level of awareness. Otherwise, we're making decisions. So when we say, I took a leadership course, oh gosh, many years ago, and one of the things I never thought was, when we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else. We're just not aware that that's what we're doing. And we guide ourselves to say yes by maybe cues in our environment of what we see is accepted. We want to belong. We want to fit, like we want to, what goes with our mask. So we are unconsciously making choices all the time. We're just not aware. We need to bring them up and be present. And because without that, we can't prioritize. And we can truly choose. We're just by default making a decision. We're making decisions. We're not necessarily making choices. So that resonated with me as you guys were talking. And how many of us have heard, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead, right? And I was like, yeah, this person it's enjoying life like that. Like, wow. Well, wait a minute. that actually, no, that's not a good thing. But we just get so, we're almost like envious, like, oh shoot, I do need my sleep. Or so how are we reacting to some of those cues that then are shifting our perception of what we, in the decisions that we make? For me personally, Daniel mentioned it at the beginning of the call, my biggest professional failure, as I thought about this, I just got interviewed for a blog, and it made me think about this question. It wasn't a project that didn't go as expected, or over budget, over time, or we just made the wrong decisions. It wasn't about that. We've had those, and we learned, and we went forward. But it was for about 18 months in my career, I was so depleted and so unaware that I was depleted, that I was here as a shell, and I was okay managing projects, but I had nothing to give to my people. And I kind of fell on that trap that Nancy mentioned earlier about almost being resentful, because I felt like they needed energy from me that I just couldn't give. And then it kind of fed this cycle of inadequacy, because as a leader, I know I'm supposed to give it, but I don't have it. But why don't I have it? And I never took the time to say, it makes sense that I'm not doing well. I lost my mother and my grandmother within a year of each other. There were all these things that were going on, but I wasn't sleeping, as a matter of like grief and insomnia and all that. But I still showed up at work. I didn't, after my bereavement, my 5-day bereavement time was up. You show up and like nothing happened. The first 5 minutes, people ask you, and then after that, everybody moves on with their lives. And I failed miserably, because I couldn't bring myself up, and I beat myself up for it at the same time. So I was consuming energy that I didn't have to try to be energetic. And
I'm sorry, go ahead, Olga.
No, that was my, now looking back, it's so clear. And at the time, I couldn't get out of it. I just could not. And I couldn't say, hey guys, I need help, I'm drowning. That was the other part. I couldn't do that. And I don't know why I couldn't do that.
So beautiful example, right? And so about putting self first. So if we're unable to attend to our own self-care, how much are we noticing others and what their needs might be as leaders? And so, Daniel, maybe speak a little bit to that in terms of your experience, in terms of not just your own personal self-care, which self first is really important, but also your interactions with others, particularly as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, I was taking a few notes as you guys were all talking, because there was a few themes that were repeated by each of you. One was habit, and the other was self-awareness. And I mean, Nancy and I have been, like she mentioned, talking back and forth for a while. We often engage with each other on LinkedIn. I focus a great deal on habits and improving our self-awareness, because I don't think a lot of people realize, but 95% of our actions we take in a given day are non or subconscious. We aren't even aware that we are doing what we're doing. So that leads to the habitual side of things and the self-awareness. Most people are lacking awareness of the self, of why they do what they do, how they do it, their drivers, etc., their fears, but they're also just going by on autopilot. And that is the way humans are. We are going to always be habitual, but it's about being more aware and mindful of choosing the right habits that feed who we want to be, rather than just feed who we're going to be. So I think a lot of people, from my experience, this is only my opinion obviously, but from my experience, a lot of people have never taken the time to stop and to reflect on what they do and why they do it. I'm always talking about what's your why, you know, figuring out what the drivers are for your actions. So if we bear in mind that most of our actions are habitual, we need to become a bit more aware of what our habits are. And to do that, we need to become more self-aware. And that for me is where we shift our focus from external to internal. And to clarify what I mean by that is social media, what other people are saying and doing, what other people need and want from us is external, what's going on outside of us. But then what's going on inside of us, both our heads and our hearts, is internal. And if we only have our focus on the external, we can get very, very distracted. We can get very, very much led down the wrong path and just stray from the path we know we want to stay on, be it a good spouse, good leader, etc. But our focus is so external that we just get pulled from pillar to post. And if we can turn our attention more internally, so that we can spend the time figuring out, what do I want and why do I want that? I think it leads to a healthier balance in life. And these things aren't like, the other problem is everyone I feel wants a quick and easy answer or pill or solution. How can I lose weight? Well, I'll get a gastric bypass because it's quick and it's simple. It might not be painless, but it's quick and it's simple. I don't have to do any great amount of thought or habit change. As when we go, right, I need to change my diet. I need to change the emotional connection I have to food, drink, drugs, social media. You know, I'm very aware, by the way, I'm kind of like saying a lot of different things, and I think each thing could be quite interesting to follow up on. But I think if people stop being so distracted by how distracting the world is, and spend some time on themselves, again, we talk about self-care and not being selfish, but being selfless to think about ourselves, we can reprioritize what we're doing and be more congruent to who we want to be.
Yeah, it's like it's shifting the way we think about it, right? Like, again, I love how you said the idea of being selfless so that you have to give. It's like that, shifting that thinking around that. Like, what does being selfless mean? Because it definitely was a shift for me. The thought that and it's funny because it's so logical. It's so common sense to think about that. But for whatever reason, in the moment when you're in the cycle of it, it just seems like this is how I need to do it. And I need to keep cutting more sleep, or I need to keep doing this, or I just will skip lunch, or I won't go out and have a good time with friends. Like, you just kind of start to take to give to something else. And the interesting thing is that something else never fills either. Right. So when I think about the idea of, I'm going to take a work example because it's just the first thing that comes to my mind. The idea of, I'm going to log in every night. I'm logging in every night once I get home, logging into work. So, because I have things to do, I have emails to respond to, project to work on. If that becomes a daily activity, what I would say then is that, well, now that's just become the habit. Like, you're not actually resolving anything, because you're not ever finishing, like this work that you're doing is never actually ending. And so if we can realize that the work, in reality, that to-do list will actually never end. That's the reality of it. It's never going to be empty. And being okay with it's not about emptying that to-do list. Because the thing is, there are times, because even from a personal experience, there are times that it makes sense for me. Like, it may not make sense for everybody. There are times there's a big project on the go, requires for some extra logging in, that totally makes sense. It's like there's something very time limited with that. But when it becomes a daily habit, like, it's a conversation I've had with a few people recently to say, is that ending? Like, as in, will this be done after tomorrow or after today? Will this end? And they're like, no, it's not going to end. So I'm like, well, then how is you logging in every night feeding into this thing? Like, what are you losing in the process of doing that? Yeah. So it is a bit of a shift for us, because it's just this sense of urgency that we create around it. And that probably, to your point, Daniel, also has this external feel, because, if everyone else is urgent about it, then I get super stressed and urgent about it. But it takes a bit of courage, right? To kind of take a step back and go, I don't know that that's the way we need to approach it, or being able to say no to something. It's a flip of what you said, Olga, around when you say no to something, you create yes for something else, right? Like, you create space for something else. It's how do we do that in the moment? Because I think those are things that a lot of us know, but in that moment of the decision-making time, we choose something different from what we know. So I'm curious, like, what the group's thoughts are around that. Like, this is a conversation we're having in a removed state right now, but when we're in it, I know for me, my decisions aren't always this thought out. So, like, how do we show up differently so that others can see, oh, there is another way of approaching this in the moment of stress, or in the kind of heat, like, in the eye of the storm.
Right.
What are some thoughts on that?
And so for me, it comes back to what Daniel was pointing us, I think, in terms of self-awareness and building your noticing muscle, in terms of noticing, hey, wait a minute, I'm doing it again. I'm logging in after work. Because actually what that is a habit, but it's actually a choice. And so what if we what if we got better at noticing kind of the choices we're making there that are feeding kind of that what we're calling the habit here in terms of logging in, and disrupted the pattern by creating boundaries for ourselves, such as, like, when I was in the corporate world, I rarely, for a period of time I was working in production support, didn't have a choice, had to kind of be on call. But when I was in my role in HR, when I went home, I rarely logged on, like almost never. So when I left, there was this freedom of energy, that I didn't have to wear this weight that I'd have to log in later. And so there was a role opportunity there, but there was also this choice of, I'm going to get done when I need to get done. Anything that's not urgent, because this isn't brain surgery that I'm doing, right, can wait till tomorrow. If it's urgent, someone can call me. And the notion of disrupting that, I've always got to respond to something because it's work. And so it's a mindset shift, right, in terms of it's actually a choice. And then we can create boundaries around, hey, bringing your BlackBerry on vacation, right? Is that really vacation if you're still technology-wise attached to work? And how many of us have done that a little bit? And so it's really getting people to notice their choices and saying, wait a minute, and reframing, I think, some of what we're talking about is actually self-care. If you disrupt the pattern of logging in after you leave work and come home, and you're taking time away from your kids and your family to actually stay online and do work, how's that affecting your self-care, your relationships with others, your ability to sleep, and all the other things that we're talking about as a primary priority and of utmost importance? And so that's the thing too. It's noticing, it's awareness, and it's choice. And from a place of non-judgment, but from a place of how can we do better, right? Back to the kind of the theme here is, how can we do better for self? And then how does that affect how we're ability to lead ourselves, our family, our team at work? And so I think it comes down to those things. And boundaries is a topic I talk a lot about with folks that I work with, in terms of, hey, wait a minute, what are some boundaries we can create here to honor what we need to do externally, as Daniel was pointing us at, but also start with honoring our self boundaries in terms of, wait a minute, I notice myself continually logging in after work. And sometimes unconsciously or subconsciously, we just, I started doing it, I do it for a period of time, and then it becomes my habit because it's just a routine I've gotten into, but I never stopped to pause and reflect and ask myself, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why am I choosing to do this? And what other choice might I make that might better serve me and ultimately others?
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much stigma surrounding self-care, and even to say, okay, when I walk out the door, I'm going to focus on this and take care of myself or other things that may be also important to me. It almost feels like you're sending the message, which you are not, of you don't care about work. And that is just not true. It is not true. Just because you don't send an email at 10 p.m. at night does not mean you don't care about work. I care deeply about what I do at work. I believe in what we do at work. But if you don't log in, it seems like, oh, well, and I think that we're carrying some of that from the past into, and now we're sort of sitting down and saying, wait a minute, that doesn't mean I don't care. It's the opposite. To your point, is reframing that the fact that I'm taking care of myself shows you how much I care, because I want to bring my best foot forward tomorrow when we start all over again.
Right. Thanks for that, Olga. And something you bring up, and I'm noticing time now, so I want to get to a closing kind of question and invite for you guys to think about. But this whole notion of valuing others' perspectives more than our own, I wonder how often that comes up in our lives or in the people we work with. And again, what is that saying about maybe how we think of ourselves, or not taking enough time to kind of look at the choices we're making that might not honor self and say, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be an either or. I serve myself or I serve someone else. If I serve myself first, I will, as we've been talking about, be better equipped to help others. It's sort of like this notion that we talk about with Humans First of, there's no get better business results or have greater humanity in the workplace. No, it's sort of like the same discussion. If we treat people as human beings and holistically look at them as human beings and honor that and the experiences they may go through at different points in time with losing family members or different things that may be happening in their life, think about how that affects them and their ability to contribute and their want to contribute discretionary energy and contributions there. And so maybe that's another topic for another time to continue the conversation. And so I guess what I'd like to ask you all to kind of think about is, as we think about this topic of energy and leadership, what are one thing that you are either doing or that you encourage others to do with regard to becoming better that you'd like to leave the listeners with in terms of a tip or an encouragement or something you've seen that works with other people, something that's important to you because you've been doing it and then you're something you also may be sharing with others. So I guess we'll start with Olga.
For me, I'm better at this for my team members than I am for myself. So I have to walk my talk, but I've always made sure, like if I see someone that it's not tired or they were sick the day before, it's send them home earlier the following day. For example, just give them, not send them but give them the permission. They will make their own decision, but make it okay. To say, you got to catch up. Yeah, you feel like you're getting better, but you know what? That's the worst you can do is to now be like nothing happened to you yesterday. So kind of give them that space so that they feel like they're doing the right thing, not just for them, but for the company, that you see them, that right. that's make that a space for them.
Love that, Olga. It sounds like you're caring. Is that what a leader's supposed to be doing? Are they supposed to care? I don't know. Daniel.
So you made me laugh at that last comment. It's too personal to care. I think a lot of people find it more comfortable to keep people at arm's length and to avoid that when they're a leader, because it means they have to bring a bit more of an honest version of themselves to work. For me personally, one of the things is we talked a lot about self-awareness and improving that. So for me, two things I find really help the leaders I work with to be more self-aware and also to be in a better place is practicing gratitude on a daily basis. I rant and rave about this on LinkedIn on a daily basis, so I might sound like a broken record, but when we practice gratitude, we shift our mindset from one of scarcity or lack to one of abundance. It shifts our perspective. It's like wearing different lenses in our glasses. So it's like if you want to have a mindset of lack and scarcity, it's like having blue brown lenses on. And then if we want to have a mindset of abundance, it's like wearing those rainbow colored lenses or something. Everything feels better. So if we practice gratitude on an individual level and we become grateful for things in life, we're more likely to be a happier, more positive, abundant person when we show up to work. And also we're more likely to find positive things when at work, if we started our day off at home or on our way to work, by focusing on things we have to be grateful for. So that's one thing that I've had great success with myself, but also with a lot of my clients. And the last thing is meditation. Like a lot of people view this as a spiritual or religious thing. Meditation is not. It's been taken over by some religions and spirituality aspects, but meditation is a pursuit of improving ourselves. So when we spend even just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you know, I give my guys and girls I work with a 10-minute audio file of guided meditation to follow. It's not even 10 minutes, it's like 9.5 minutes long. And it just helps you stop, slow down, clear the craziness of thoughts that might be going on, the chaos that's in your mind, especially as a leader when you have 1,000,001 things to think about. When we kind of slow that down and clear the air, rather than having to think above the noise of every other thought, we've turned down the volume on all the background noise and we've dialed up the volume on the specific thing you want to think about. And when we do that, we're more present, we're more aware. So if we can practice a bit of meditation to create that great sense of self-awareness and clarity alongside the gratitude that makes us more positive and abundant, for me, that's had profound impacts with my clients. To the point where, you know, some of the guys I work with who are the owners or the CEOs of companies have had people remark how they're actually a joy to be around now. You know, in 360 reviews, they've, rather than getting neutral to negative commentary, they're having positive feedback about how they actually look forward to speaking to their boss, that kind of thing. And then that fosters, you know, we're talking about leadership here. Everything within a company, regardless of size, is top down. How you behave as the boss, as the leader, has an impact on everyone who's below you. So if you're in a bad mood, everyone else is probably going to be in a bad mood. If you're a happy, positive, open-minded individual who's in the moment, who's present, you're going to give everybody else the same space to do the same.
Love that. Thank you, Daniel. Nancy.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off of what Daniel said. For me, it really is giving thanks, like just that gratitude piece, I would say is important from a personal perspective, like as an individual, as well as what it can then channel outwards. So I would really, when I think about gratitude, I don't think about it as a very like onerous thing, like something really big. I'm waiting for something really big to happen. I make myself aware regularly throughout the day about the little things. And the one example I share, just because it stands out to me so much, is just like sometimes if I'm just drinking a cup of coffee or some beverage and I'm just really enjoying it, just to be able to say, man, like I'm so grateful for this warm cup of coffee, the way it tastes right now, just it's amazing. And there's nothing wrong. Like, I think we should be more grateful for those small things, because that's really what our day is made up of. Our days are made up of the small things. And I like to use this phrase of like, it's just fine tuning our senses to be very aware of the little things that bring us joy, right? Like sometimes someone might just give you a hug and it makes you feel really good. And that's just, like you're grateful for something really small instead of waiting for something really big to happen, because then we're waiting for something. Whereas our days actually have a lot of really nice things in each moment, to just be aware of those and regularly. So I'd certainly say like starting your morning that way with like 5 things, ending your day with 5 things. But don't leave it there. Like make it into just in the moment. I'm like, man, I'm just so grateful right now for what was shared in this call. Like it's actually given me awareness of other things I need to be thinking about, and just truly experience the feel of being grateful for it. And that's what I mean. It's not just saying I'm grateful for or thank you for. It's just like really feeling it as well. Like take a moment to pause and feel what it feels like. That just all of a sudden makes you just realize, like, the more we do that, it just creates a different energy for ourselves. And then you can take that outwards into your teams. Like there's one exercise that we used to do as a team in one of my previous companies, which I think is an amazing practice to do, is in our department meeting. It was just the first thing that we did was, who would you like to recognize? There was it wasn't someone had something when you're just like, it became a habit for us to just proactively be able to say, hey, you know what? So it's a monthly meeting, department meeting that would happen. And so and it was an open floor. And let's say I raised my hand and I said, well, I really want to recognize Brian because, I was running the session last week and I was really struggling, and he stepped up and kind of stepped in for me when I was really having a hard time, or something really small. And it was not a leader who initiated it. It was just, that was how the meeting started. And so what happened was we would just start to, like, the team's feel with each other was just an amazing feel. Like you always felt grateful. Like I was grateful for my team. Like you felt grateful for everybody who was around the table. So when I went into another department, when people from other departments would come in as guests into our meeting, they would be like, oh, that's actually really cool. Like, what are you guys doing here? And it was just something that was our culture. Like, it's just something we did. I didn't start it. Like, it was there well before me, but it was just something that continued on. And I think it's a simple practice that can help any team. And it's not a leader's ownership to do that. It becomes what the team does. And you start to really care for each other. Because we would then be attentive, like you would start to get aware. Like in that moment, you'd be like, okay, let me think, like what's happened in the last week, last month. And you just start to become aware to then call something out. And then sometimes maybe nobody said anything. That was okay too. But there was never a meeting where there was not a recognition, and just because it just came from a place of people wanting to do that. So I think it can happen on a personal level. And then when you become that way, you can do that with other people too, a lot better.
Which is the opposite, I'd add, Nancy, of how a lot of team meetings or any meetings will go where it's turned to the negative. And one person starts to bitch about something, the next person piggybacks, and it's this negative spiral of everything that could go wrong or they perceive has gone wrong, they start to complain about. Yeah, so I mean, I was thinking when you were talking about your example there that it's infectious.
Yes.
When you're grateful, it's infectious.
Yes.
The problem is, so is negativity.
Exactly.
So both ways.
Emotions are contagious, so you can decide which way you want to take everybody, right? Yeah, absolutely.
And emotions are energy, right? And so that's the topic of energy and leadership, right? If you choose to start the meeting as your team did and you became a part of it with who would you like to recognize, different energy, then all right, let's go through the issues list and go through what's red and go through that process. Different way to start the meeting, and then what happens after that changes because of how you choose to start. So love that. Love all of what you said from everybody, from Olga with caring and choosing to be attentive to the humanity of someone that may be sick and giving permission and honoring their needs. And then Daniel, you spoke my words for me in terms of the 2 things that have been the most impactful in my journey is a gratitude practice and meditation. And meditation, kind of for what the words you were using, it's a pause practice. It's a quiet my mind practice. So I better focus and put attention on the things that matter. So I make better choices or able to set boundaries. It's all the things we're talking about. And so we're trying to give some ideas about practices. The 2 things I'll mention in terms of what I'll leave folks with is redefining your notion of what self-care is. Self-care is, yes, exercise, it's eating right, it's sleeping. It's also making choices that honor yourself, right? And so to Nancy's example of logging in and building the habit there, taking the time to pause and say, wait a minute, is this something I'm choosing to do that is necessary, or is it something I'm choosing to do because it's just what I've always been doing and I don't really need to do it, and I can instead create better boundaries and instead invest my time in myself and my family once I leave work. And so looking at self-care differently and maybe more expansively than we might currently do is an opportunity I'd like to invite people into. And the second one would be this notion of time trading versus prioritization. And we talked about the notion of, I don't have time for this. I translate that language. My translation is, I haven't yet clarified my prioritization. And so, and Nancy used the example of something that, maybe coming up last minute where you find the time and you get it done. And so, yes, we get it done. And that's sort of like, because, that's the expectation of others, or you're just, you're in the habit of, the mindset of for yourself of, I'm an achiever, I just get things done. That can build a habit of people knowing to go to you if something needs to get done last minute. So you get these last minute requests on it, which is a habit you want to break, right? And so that gets to the topic of prioritization and setting boundaries and choices, and that being self-care, making different choices that honor yourself as being self-care as well. And so I want to thank you all for your contributions for this conversation. It went in a couple of different directions I didn't expect. It expanded my perspective, which is my hope for this. And hopefully the people that listen to this will feel the same way. Any last closing comments before we sign off?
One thing you mentioned, Brian, at the end about emotion and energy, and we've tapped upon it a couple of times. From my experience working with people, our emotions are not always things that we're aware of. And one of the biggest issues is if we have issues with identifying our emotions, or if we have issues relating to how we feel on a physical level, and then translating that verbally into I feel, so we feel something physically, but we don't know how to explain it, that can cause problems because we aren't aware of how we actually are feeling. We're not interpreting how we're feeling. We misinterpret, so we do the wrong thing. But also, I'd argue that even if we are aware, a lot of the times people will do things, eat food, drink alcohol, take drugs, be busy is a huge one, to stop themselves from having to sit with how they actually feel. And a lot of people have trauma of varying degrees that they haven't resolved. And I think a lot of people keep themselves busy so that they don't have a spare second to feel or recognize how they feel. If you're always busy, if you're always eating something, drinking, doing drugs, whatever the distraction is, if you're always doing, then you can't stop and feel. So I think it's a big thing is to become more okay with how you feel, whether it's negative or positive. All emotions, need to be acknowledged. They don't need to be dwelled on necessarily, but we need to acknowledge how we feel rather than numb that.
It's a really good point. And even what you said about then the one thing of like feeling it, like being okay and taking the time to feel it, and the other side of just being able to even then articulate that to somebody, that words of I feel is really feels very exposing, right? Like it kind of just like I'm showing up everything about my stuff, right? And really brings me back to what you said earlier on, Olga, about like the time when you felt you were an absentee leader. You went through some significant losses in your family, but you said the idea of raising your hand to say, it's what I'm feeling, it's what I'm going through, was just didn't feel comfortable. And so there's this lack of just feeling safe that I can actually speak this part about me because that's what's actually happening. And doing it even if others are not necessarily going to be behind you, right? Like that, I think there's a combination of those things that get in there.
Even the conditioning that goes into that, because we're coached to not say I feel. We're coached to say I think or I believe. And right? At least I've been coached to do that. That the second I said I feel, it's almost like, okay, all credibility is out the window. Or
what proof do you have that that's how you feel?
Yes, yeah. So it's interesting. As you guys were talking about that, the I feel, I said, conditioning comes in where you're not even supposed to say those words, let alone then pause and allow yourself to sit on that feeling.
Yeah.
I think also, especially for women in the workplace as a leader, it is a big no-no to say I feel. Like, you are not allowed to be remotely feminine. You're not allowed to remotely have emotions, because that's going to be perceived as a weakness in the boardroom. The women I've worked with who are senior, they've mentioned this a lot, Olga, that I can't say how I feel. I've got to totally break things down to the point of a logical argument, because if I ever said I feel in front of my colleagues, you would just lose all credibility. So I think, that's another aspect to bear in mind. But isn't that a shame that we can't allow people, we all feel, everything that happens makes us feel, everything is derived from an emotion. So it's ridiculous to say that you shouldn't talk about how you feel.
So many great topics and conversation there
say,
for what to come next.
Some topics for future conversations.
I talk about muting all the time, and unmuting people is part of my journey in terms of giving them voice. And, what if we could work in a workplace where we could feel, women could say, I feel, or any of us could talk about how we feel, and we could care about other people? What would be different? Well, actually, now there's data to prove that when we're more human in the workplace, you do get better business results. So look forward to future conversations in this platform and with you all individually. Thank you all for your time, your energy, your contributions, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.